This notion that Katie Porter will be an innovative governor is a joke. Absolute joke.
The Karen Bass recall. This woman is just a disaster. So if you can even save a year of her, that would be helpful to the people of LA.
I often said I have a two-step plan, Steve, to save California. Keep the illegal aliens, deport the Democrats.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Steve Hilton Show special episode today to coincide with a very special day. It is the publication day for my new book, Califailure, Reversing the Ruin of America's Worst Run State. Have you ordered your copy? Have you bought your copy? You can actually get it in a bookstore now, Tuesday, March the 25th, a day I've been looking forward to for ages, so I could be out there making the argument about how and why the one-party rule by the Democrats has been a failure on every front, but most importantly, how we can turn it around. The second part of the book is called Califuture, and it's a plan for how we turn things around and make California what it should be, the very best of America, not what it is now, which is basically worst on every measure that matters. So that's the occasion to have some special conversations in today's episode. We're going to be joined by Larry Elder, who of course ran for governor of California in the recall election, and another friend and former candidate, Lahnee Chen, who ran a great campaign for controller in 2022. So those are the conversations we got for you today, all about California. Hope you enjoy them. Oh, look who it is. I'm so excited. Looking very, very, I think you look great. It's a new look. For those who are watching rather than just listening, it's Larry Elder with, for me anyway, a whole new look. I think he looks fantastic. The glasses, we love it. What's that about, Larry?
Well, Steve, I've got the Steve Hilton crew neck, too. Don't forget about that.
No, exactly. The whole ensemble. It's fantastic.
I came prepared.
No,
good. I can't see well for up close. I see fine visual far away. I had LASIK years ago to get rid of glasses, which I had to wear all the time. So I need them for close up. And since we're on this video here, and for order for me to look at your beautiful eyes, I've got to put the glasses on.
That's very important.
You remember when the former governor of Texas was running, and during that debate, he said, we need to eliminate 3 departments. We need to eliminate Department of Education, of Commerce, of and then he said, Education, Commerce, hoops, and he was done. Well, the next time we saw him, he ran again. He had glasses on, and Donald Trump famously said, you just put those glasses on so people think you look smart. And everybody was thinking it, but nobody but Trump actually said it.
Yes, that's the same. That's the excuse for my English accent as well, by the way. People think you're smarter.
Yeah, I've always thought, Steve, that you were really from the Bronx, and this is just a big put on. But,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, you know this subject better than anyone. I've got this book out, Califailure. Of course, you chronicled all of that and
Right.
continue to do so when you were running for governor. I'm going to ask you a really kind of broad question. Obviously, we can get into individual areas of the failure, but I'm just curious what your take is, Larry, on why, what's underlying all of this? How has it gone so badly wrong with this Democrat one-party rule? What's driving it? Why is it so bad?
Well, the snarky answer, by the way, the title of your book, Califailure, is just brilliant. I wish I had thought of it. The snarky answer is, I often said I have a two-step plan, Steve, to save California. Keep the illegal aliens, deport the Democrats. And I'm sort of serious about that, because you have Gavin Newsom, who was a 2-term mayor of San Francisco. And he said when he was mayor, at the end of his second term, he was going to have the homelessness problem in the Bay Area solved. Have you been to San Francisco lately? I know you have. It's just awful. And then he was lieutenant governor for 8 years and sat around claiming he had nothing to do. And whenever he said that, I shouted, please, why don't you go back to your city, your hometown, and do what you said you were going to do? And now he's been governor. This is his second term. Thank goodness he's termed out. And I blame lots of people, but primarily I blame the voters. When you keep voting over and over and over again for Democrats, to the point where the Senate is 2/3 Democrat, the Assembly is 2/3 Democrat. There hasn't been a Republican elected statewide in California in over 20 years. It's on you. Crime up, homelessness up, the poverty rate up, people leaving California the first time in 150 years. We have a home ownership average price that is twice the nation's average. The schools do not work. Over 75% of third graders can neither read nor do math at grade level, black and brown third graders. You have this incessant drive for climate change, as if California implemented every single climate change initiative that the legislature and Gavin Newsom wanted to do, it would have any impact whatsoever on the climate, because we're just one state. We have the lowest rate of businesses created in California. It's beyond appalling. And meanwhile, I'm in Los Angeles, where the most prominent newspaper, of course, is the LA Times. And until the recent owner has changed its editorial policy, they endorsed left-wing person after left-wing person, including Gavin Newsom twice, including Gavin Newsom during the recall election, even said the recall itself was undemocratic, even though it is part of the California Constitution. They endorsed Karen Bass, who's done a disastrous job as mayor of LA, had a chance to endorse Caruso, who's a developer, for crying out loud, had a plan to deal with the homelessness. By the way, Caruso spent $100 million of his own money, more money than anybody's ever spent by far on any mayoral race in LA. She spent $10 million, so he outspent her by a factor of 10, and she still got elected by about 9 points. I don't know what to say other than voters, wake the bleep up.
It's so bad, right? When you listed it, there, it's so bad on every front. There's nothing they can point to that's going well. What is it that's I mean, other states you can look at and they're run by Democrats, but it's not the scale of what's happened in California and the kind of clarity of, it's a failure on every single front. Why? Why has it? What's wrong with them? The politicians.
I think it is the constant drumbeat. Republicans bad, Republicans bad, Republicans bad, by the media, by the Sacramento Bee, by the newspapers in the Bay Area, and of course by the LA Times. When I ran, Steve, I at the time had taken one picture of Donald Trump side by side in my life, one, and I posted it on social media. I don't even know when. And that's what they showed over and over and over again on TV ads. Of course, I was outspent 10-1, so they were flooded. But they didn't say Gavin Newsom is doing a great job in the way he shut down the state over COVID in a more severe way than did any of the other governors. Gavin Newsom is doing a great job on the budget, taking a $100 billion budget surplus and turning it into a multi-billion-dollar budget deficit. Gavin Newsom is doing a great job on this, that, and the other. They didn't say any of that. They just said, stop the Republican takeover. Republican in California is a 4-letter word. In my book, As Goes California, my mission to rescue the Golden State and save the nation, I start out by talking about a couple of stories. My race is over, Steve. I go to a restaurant on the west side of LA. LA is already liberal, west side even more liberal. And I get there early, and my buddy's not yet there. So I'm sitting at the desk at the table by myself. And next to me are two rather elderly ladies. And I think they feel sorry for me, seeing me sitting there by myself, nursing my drink for about 15, 20 minutes. We start talking. And it turns out that they are both 85 years old. One was celebrating her 85th birthday. They've known each other since the second grade. One called herself a human rights activist. One said she was a psychotherapist. And then after about 15 minutes into the conversation, Steve, one of them says, wait a minute. I know you. You're that guy that ran for governor. You're that Larry Elder. She said, guess who we voted for? I said, you didn't vote for me. She said, how do you know that? I said, let's see, we're on the west side of LA. One of you said you were a human rights activist. It doesn't take Colombo to put that together. You didn't vote for me. And they both admitted that they didn't. I said, let me ask you something. Have you lost friends who've left California because they couldn't buy a home or because Gavin Newsom caused their business to fail? They both said yes. I said, do you have kids? They said yes. I said, do you live in LA? They said yes. I said, did you put your kids in LA Unified? And they both admitted they did not after elementary school. I said, how do you feel about the cost of living? They said, outrageous. I said, how do you feel about the homelessness problem? They both admitted that they lived near homeless encampments. And I said, how do you feel about the way that the budget has been run? They said, outrageous. And I said, so here we are completing each other's sentences, but you didn't vote for me. Have you ever had a conversation with a Republican before? They looked at each other and they admitted they had not. And then one of
Amazing.
them said, "What are you drinking?" I said, "Double vodka with a splash of cranberry and orange juice." And the other one said, "What are you eating?" I said, "Well, I wasn't going to have steak, but if you're going to buy it, I'm going to upgrade it to lobster." So they bought my drinks. They bought lobster. We had a great time. Another story, this was just a little bit after that. I've got some back issues. So a friend of mine recommended a massage therapist. I have address. I'm driving, thinking I'm going to be in an office building, and it's a residential street. So I get out, I knock on the door. Woman opens the door, maybe 40 years old. She's got tattoos everywhere but her eyeballs. Her hair is about 4 or 5 different colors. I get smacked in the face with a big plume of marijuana smoke. Not that I would know what that would smell like, of course, Steve. And she's working on me on my back. She's playing Motown music, which is my favorite genre of popular music. So every time a song came on, I knew something about it, who wrote it, the background story. My Girl came out. I said, that was written by Smokey Robinson for the lead singer of the Temptations. His name is David Ruffin. All the Temptations now are dead. Many of them died because of drug overdoses. Another song came on. I knew the background, knew the background, knew the background. Half hour into the therapy session, she says, "I know who you are. When you called to make your appointment, I knew who you were. I just wasn't going to say anything because I didn't vote for you. Had I known you were this funny and this personable, I would have voted for you." I said, "Do you know any Republicans?" She said, "No." I said, "Nobody in your neighborhood is Republican?" She said, "Not that I know of." I said, "News bulletin, we have senses of humor. We have personalities." Steve, honestly, you
Amazing.
can't swing a dead cat in California without hitting a liberal, but the liberals can easily live in a little silo where they know absolutely no Republicans, and they've developed this caricature that they're mean and nasty, sour, no senses of humor. Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. Those are amazing stories, and it's so frustrating, um, especially to hear after the event. Do you think that there's any change in that with? I mean, just the national. I suppose I don't know what the word is. Not it's not quite reappraisal, but the toxicity that they tried to put there on Donald Trump personally. Obviously, we saw that from the moment he came down the escalator all through 2016, all through the first presidency, and all the attempts to take him down. But something happened in that last campaign, and it was the way you saw the youth culture moving towards Trump and the podcasting world, all that kind of stuff, right? So suddenly it's more socially acceptable. You saw the tech industry in the Bay Area, some of the leading figures, Elon Musk, obviously the best example, particularly after the assassination attempt. That was the moment I thought you saw a lot of people saying, you know what, this guy's, in the words of Mark Zuckerberg, he's a badass, right? Do you think that that cultural change is just Trump? Do you think it extends to Republicans more broadly, or it's really a Donald Trump thing?
No, I think it's a Donald Trump thing. Primarily, it has caused a lot of people to take a fresh look at the Republican Party in general. You look at the poll numbers for Democrats; they've never been this low since they've been taking polling numbers. So I think that a lot of people are recognizing that Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and he means what he says what he means. But the Republicans are now going along with it, so it's causing them to have a sea change attitude, especially young people and independents at the Republican Party in general. Uh, your question also, of course, is, do I believe that that phenomenon could extend itself to California? And I think it already has. You look at Donald Trump's numbers in 2024, they were twice what they were the last time he ran. Proposition 36, which essentially repealed Proposition 47, that allowed you
Yep.
to steal up to $950 a day. And more importantly, allowed you to sit on the streets and do meth without any fear of going to jail. Because at one time, the police said either you get off the streets, go to rehab, or go to jail, pick one. Now you can't say that after 47 because it's a misdemeanor. And since we have cashless bail here in California, there's zero chance of you going to jail. And so the homeless problem increased, according to sheriffs I've talked to. Essentially, that Proposition 47 has been gutted by 36. And Gavin Newsom opposed 36. The LA Times opposed 36. It won, as you know, by about 30 points. You have the recall of the mayor of Oakland. You have the defeat of the mayor of San Francisco for re-election. And then here in LA County, where I am, George Gascon was defeated by almost 40 points. So there are some green shoots, including Proposition, I think it was 16, that wanted to gut 209. In the mid-90s, California passed Proposition 209 to reject the use of race in the area of contracting, the admissions to colleges and universities, and hiring for government jobs. It passed overwhelmingly. Well, the demographic of the state has changed. Now the largest ethnic group in California are Hispanics. So the legislature reintroduced a bill to put back the use of race. The LA Times supported it. Gavin Newsom supported the use of race-based preferences again. And the people that were in favor of race-based preferences outspent those opposed to it 20-1. And
That's
it's
right.
still lost. Even left-wing California says, what the hell is this? Hire people based on merit. So I think there are a lot of interesting things happening here. They still have supermajorities in the Senate and in the Assembly, which is a huge, huge problem. So a little step for little feet.
Yeah, fair enough. You mentioned the recalls. In an earlier episode, I was talking to Nicole Shanahan, who obviously ran with Bobby Kennedy for vice president, and she's very focused on California. And I've been working with her on the Karen Bass recall. You're there. What do you think of that? Rick Caruso's come out against it. Where are you on that?
I'm not against it, but I just wonder whether or not it's a waste of energy and money that could be spent on, for example, someone like you, if you decide to run. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Okay, thank you.
I just don't know. I mean, and if she gets recalled, who replaces her? This is a 85% or so city left wing, and they'll probably put another left wing person in it. God forbid we should have the phenomenon that they had in Chicago, where Lori Lightfoot is defeated. Then you have Brad Johnson, who's a moron, an absolute total moron, whose popularity now is in single digits. So I fear what happens after Karen Bass.
Yeah, I mean, Nicole's argument, and I agree with Nicole, I've been working with her on it, is like, it's different with LA, every day she's there is a bad day for LA. You got to there's so much to do.
Right.
She's so absolutely incompetent. There's massive deficit that's just been announced, and then you've got the Olympics to prepare for, Super Bowl, Soccer World Cup, all these big things, rebuilding, of course, after the fires. And this woman is just a disaster. So if you can even save a year of her, being there, that would be helpful to the people of LA.
Well, if the recall passes, I will vote for her dismissal. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Great. So what about the broader, sort of California scene? You talked about some of these propositions. I agree with that. And also, I think in 2024 you had a number of counties flipping from blue to red. So that's great. I mean, what would be your if you were running now, right, what would you be focusing on? What's the story you'd want to tell?
I left out one other green shoot, and that is that on the ballot was a ballot to raise the minimum wage. There was a law that Gavin Newsom signed that increased the minimum wage for fast food workers from $16 an hour to $20 an hour in one fell swoop. And a lot of us predicted what was going to happen. This is just economics 101. And since then, there was a study out by the Berkeley group that found 16,000 fast food workers in California lost their jobs. So there was another ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage for everybody else, and it was defeated. That's the first time there's ever been a ballot initiative to increase the minimum wage that's been defeated in the history of California. By the way, Gavin Newsom cited some study that purported to claim that not only were there no fast food work losses, but that there were in fact fast food worker gains. And it was completely obliterated by the Berkeley study that I mentioned. And I mentioned that because Gavin Newsom has an amazing capacity to look you in the face and lie in the most convincing way.
It is amazing. I know. I mean, and you're seeing it. I mean, over and over. That's what was so frustrating with some of those debates. Remember the debate with DeSantis? He was just totally lie. Like flat out lying and all the time. Well, before I want to come back to the question about California and the story, but let's just talk about this podcast. I mean, what do you make of what he's doing with the podcast?
Well, I know that I've heard you say that he didn't invite you on, and Lord,
yes,
he didn't invite me on. I challenged him repeatedly to debate me during the recall election, and of course, he refused to do so. He's trying to reposition himself as not a California, San Francisco nutcase. And so he's had on Steve Bannon, he's had on Charlie Kirk, and the idea is for people to perceive him as A, being brave, and B, being not a nutcase. But again, he lied and lied and lied. Just take the little thing that he said when Charlie Kirk asked him, why the hell are you using this term Latinx? He says, nobody in my office has ever used it. Well, there's tape after tape.
It's amazing.
Tape of this man using it, even calling people who don't like to use it essentially racist. He'll just lie and lie and lie. He publicly said that he had cleared a certain number of acreage of the thick trees and fallen debris. And even the LA Times said that he lied by a factor of 7 or misspoke by a factor of 7. This guy is just unbelievable the way he can sit there and lie. Now, Ted Cruz has a podcast, but Texas is a well-run state. There's a magazine called CEO Magazine that's been around about 15, 20 years. And every year they ask CEOs, what is the best state in which to do business? What is the worst state in which to do business? Every year for the existence of the magazine, they've said Texas. And as far as the worst state for every year, pretty much they've said California. So it's one thing for Ted Cruz to have a podcast. It's another thing for Gavin Newsom to have a podcast. We've got all these problems that I talked about at the top of our interview. Why didn't he just go and do his freaking job instead of trying to position himself as a non-nutcase in California? The best way to show that you're not a non-nutcase is results. And look at what we've got here in California.
I think that's just a beautiful, perfect little summary of this situation. I love that. There's something magical about the term non-nutcase. I don't know why. It really appeals to me. I think that's brilliant.
Vote Newsom. Vote me. I'm a non-nutcase. California.
Fantastic.
That's a campaign slogan.
I love it. I think it's great. Well, it kind of answers the other question I had, which is, what would you be saying if you were running out? By the way, also, I totally agree with you on the Ted Cruz point. And actually, he's been doing it for a while, and it's doing very well. But also, he's a senator, which is very different. It's not an executive job. He's not running anything. He's a senator. He's supposed to be out there making arguments, legislation, whatever. That's kind of what the job is.
I'm not demeaning senators, but frankly, all they do is vote. That's their job. An executive has to run the state. And his job is to make the state sound economically and to protect people and property from crime. He has done neither. So as far as I'm concerned, it's insulting every time he's behind the mic, kicking back there with people, giving his thoughts when we have seen the results of your left-wing policies.
And it's nothing to do with California. That's the other thing. It's all his, as you say, national repositioning. Obviously, that's what's going on here. Like when the first one that made the headlines was the point on biological men in girls' sports. And he's saying, yeah, it's terribly unfair and whatever, deeply unfair. That was his phrase. And okay, great. So do something about it. You're the governor now. You are the actual governor. Right? Do something about this terrible unfairness. Even if you say, oh, well, it's complicated because it's the legislature, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, at least try. You're the leader of the party in California. He's doing nothing literally since then. I mean, it's 2 weeks? Not a peep out of him with any actual action.
At the very least, he's got the bully pulpit. He hasn't even used that. There is a law in California that allows biologically born men to compete against women. He has praised that law. He has never condemned it. There are 2 bills right now Republicans have introduced in the legislature to outlaw biological men from competing against women. He has not supported either one of them, not given either one of them any kind of verbal support. So it's just BS. Absolute BS.
Yes, I was going to say that's right. That is literally what it is. But he's obviously going to keep going with this.
Yeah.
This podcast, so we'll see. I mean, I don't know. It is an insult to everyone in California when we have such, if everything was going great in California and it was on autopilot and things are perfect.
Right.
Okay. But no, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
There are so many insulting things, Steve. Let's just take reparations. California wasn't even a slave state. And this man signed a bill establishing a reparations panel to recommend the amount of money that Black descendants of slaves in California should receive. What is that all about? Why in the world should people who are not slave owners pay anything to people who were never slaves? The whole premise is insulting, particularly when you're talking about a state that wasn't even a slave state. Yet he signed that legislation. Publicly said that by the year 2035, no more sale of new gas-powered cars in California. He has since now retreated from that because he realizes how unpopular that is. But after he made that edict, he sent out 2 days later an energy alert urging the 2.9% of California vehicle owners who do own EVs not to charge them during peak hours because it stresses the California energy grid. Hello, can you imagine if every single vehicle in California was an EV when he's already telling the 2.9% not to charge their cars during peak hours because it taxes the California energy grid? I don't know what to say.
It's insane. And then you've got, and in Southern California, every time I'm there, I notice these ads and billboards and TV ads, whatever, all the, I don't, it comes, I don't know what time of year it mostly appears. You'll see them. The don't use your appliances between 4 and 9 p.m. like we're some kind of third world country where you can't guarantee power. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And Steve, DEI is now under retreat. You're finding major corporation after major corporation dropping their DEI, college after college dropping their DEI because of the executive order that Donald Trump signed. This man, Gavin Newsom, signed a bill mandating that every publicly held corporation in California have at least one member of a disadvantaged community, LGBTQ plus or whatever it is. Mandating it. It is clearly unconstitutional, clearly a violation of the 14th Amendment. He signed it anyway, and now he's trying to position himself as a non-nutcase. Give me a break.
No, I mean, there's so much there. Exactly. I mean, the whole thing is just, it's sort of beyond parody, really.
How about the bill he signed mandating that large toy store sellers
Yes.
have a gender-neutral toy ad? So I guess if your gender-neutral kid wants a safe space, he or she has a safe space. Who does that? Who mandates the outlaw of the sale of new gasoline-powered leaf blowers and lawnmowers, as if that's going to have a real big impact on climate change?
Oh, it's so infuriating. But the toy thing, I was just talking about that because I can't remember who I was with. It's a family that had new kids, and they were just describing how the boys want this kind of toy and the girl wants that kind of toy. It was just completely natural, and there was no kind of, they didn't sort of lead them either way. That's just how it is. And so it's just fighting nature. It's like, no, you can't have, but you cannot have. It's racist and sexist and terrible gender stereotype. Like, this is just what happens in normal life, and they're trying to deny nature.
And then there's a matter of character. And I don't normally get into that, and didn't really get into that when I ran for the recall election. But this is a man, Gavin Newsom, who, when he ran, I believe it was for either governor or lieutenant governor, I forget, was having an affair with his campaign manager's wife. And his campaign manager was his best friend. Having run for office, Steve, let me say this. Do you know how difficult it is to get a good campaign manager? But who does that?
He always kind of skates by, and he does these, like hammy performances. And I've seen the video of that. I mean, it's really bad,
And there's a new book out about him. And it turns out he's been lying for decades that he got a scholarship at, I think it was Santa Clara, as a baseball pitcher. Turns out he spent one semester on the JV baseball team, not varsity. He got hurt, never went back, and has been lying for years, claiming that not only did he get a scholarship to pitch baseball for that college, but that I think it was the Detroit Tigers recruited him as a prospect for the major leagues. You played one semester of JV and a major league team to recruit you? Are you kidding me?
Last question. What about the Democrats? I mean, he's termed out. He's wants to run for president, obviously. But what about Katie Porter, who just announced for governor the other week? Kamala Harris, obviously, she's kind of thinking about it. She's going to let us know by the end of the summer, she says. What do you make of all that?
I didn't realize that Katie Porter had announced, because I know earlier she said she would not announce if Kamala Harris intended to run. So maybe there's something she knows.
Well, no, it's even worse than that. It's even more pathetic. She announced, but then literally the day of the announcement, she had her press people briefing the media, so it's in all the reports, that she would drop out if Kamala ran. So what a joke. You're like, oh yeah, I really want to be governor unless Kamala wants to do it. I mean, it's just pathetic.
Well, I think she recognizes that the polls show that Kamala Harris would be odds-on favorite if she declared. Plus, Kamala Harris has a lot of money to spend. And so I think Porter realizes that if Kamala Harris got in, she would lose. The only other Democrat that would get in, irrespective of what Kamala Harris does, is Antonio Villaraigosa, the two-term mayor of LA. So it'll be very interesting. I don't think it's going to be Kamala Harris in a cakewalk, because what a vapid campaigner she is, what space cadet she is, and people are going to focus a lot more on that than they did before. Keep in mind, before she lost for VP, she had never lost an election when she was on the ballot. I know she ran briefly in 2024, but she dropped out before the first primary. She ran for DA of San Francisco. She got elected. She got reelected. She ran for AG of California, got elected, got reelected. She ran for senator, got elected, got reelected. She had never lost an election when she had been on the ballot until just now. So it's not going to be a cakewalk.
I agree. What about Katie Porter, though? Do you have a chance to, I know, just like watching her over the years, and she's, when she was down in Orange County, what do you think of her?
Not much. I mean, she's a basic California lefty, and Adam Schiff ran against her for the Senate and beat her. So, and Adam Schiff, of course, positioned it so that he would run against somebody beatable like Steve Garvey. Steve Garvey's a very likable guy, but that's the opponent he wanted. And Gavin Newsom did the same thing when he manipulated so his opponent would be a Republican who would very likely lose. So I don't think very much of her. Just your basic left-wing tax spend, regulate California. So what? Been there, done that.
Yeah, all the things that have got us into this mess in the first place. Well, Larry, it should have been you. Should have been you whenever, was it 4 years ago now? The
Yeah,
recall,
2021.
wasn't it? Yeah. So what's next? What's your next move?
Well, I've gone back to radio as of August. I'm now with Salem. I've got a nationally syndicated show, which I've had for 30 years until when I ran for governor and briefly ran for president. I do a weekly podcast, which is pinned to the top of my Twitter account. It gets about 500,000 views every week. And I give a lot of speeches, and I'm going to be backing whoever wins the primary for the California gubernatorial election. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Thank you very much, Larry. Understood.
Yeah.
We'll talk later. It's great to have you join us there. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Thanks, Larry. All right, joining us now, I'm so happy to say, my friend Lahnee Chen, who knows all about why California is such a Califailure, because he campaigned on it and did very well. The best performance by any Republican in California for, I don't know, at least 2 decades, I think. Is that right, Lahnee? When you ran for controller in
yeah, for sure. It was we've had some difficulty breaking through, as they say in California.
Yes, but you did better than anyone else.
Well, I think it was campaign that was premised on the right set of issues around the frustrations that Californians feel about the lack of accountability for all the money the state spends.
Exactly, which is getting worse and worse. Now, I just want to ask you a big picture question. What, in your analysis, why? I mean, why has it been such a disaster and seems to really be getting worse?
Steve, I think it has a lot to do with the lack of any real policy discussion and the lack of any alternative set of considerations around really any major issue. I mean, you think about tax policy or economic policy or water policy or education policy or criminal justice, where I think we have begun to see the pendulum swing back. In my mind, the diagnosis has a lot to do with the lack of a robust policy debate. And I attribute that to the one-party governance we've had in California for, going on over 2 decades now. And I think when you have one-party governance, and by the way, maybe not unique to California, there are other states that are suffering potentially from some of these challenges. I think California is the worst when it comes to what I would term policy sclerosis, where you have just a lack of any kind of innovative, thoughtful move on public policy, because there really isn't a political incentive to go beyond what your own political party or your own political movement wants. In this case, it's the Democrats and progressives, and they just get more and more progressive, and there really isn't a check until voters say, well, hang on a second, this is not what we signed up for. So I think that's what it is, Steve. I think it's really a lack of that innovative policy thinking that comes from a lack of political competition.
And what do you think of the worst? I mean, it's sort of invidious to sort of do a league table, but what are the worst failures for you when we just think about policy area by area?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think if you look at the wildfires, the tragic wildfires in Southern California, and the effort to rebuild from those, we have the answer, right, in terms of what Gavin Newsom has done to waive, 2 laws, the California Coastal Act and the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, that have stood in the way not just of people trying to rebuild from tragic events, but have stood in the way of really a lot of economic growth that the state could be seeing They have sort of bollocksed up projects, new economic development projects for decades. They have prevented us from having a viable water strategy, for example, that actually gets water from where it primarily is sourced to where it largely is consumed, and has just been a boondoggle for lawyers, for lawyers that litigate these issues and do nothing but interfere, in my mind, with the ability of the state to really develop and move forward. So I think there's failures around existing laws, around the regulatory mechanisms. I think a lot of economic policies are wrongheaded. Look, criminal justice is an area we could spend a whole hour talking about alone, right? The inability of this state to really understand and recognize that we have to make crime criminal. Now, we're starting to see some of that, very encouraged by the election, for example, last November of my friend Nathan Hochman as the district attorney of LA County. Very encouraged that voters turned back some of the most damaging parts of another voter passed proposition from several years ago that made an effort to recriminalize some things and again get tough on certain crimes. I think those are all good trends, but we have a long way to go in this state on economic issues, on criminal justice issues, and basic governance issues. The fact that people don't necessarily trust the sanctity of their votes, the fact that we need to have a system where people feel like it is easier to vote than it is to cheat in elections. I think that's another area that we've got to take a look at. So all of these areas, I think, are areas that are ripe for reform.
So it's interesting. Let's just talk about the economic aspects here, because you see Gavin Newsom out there on his podcast and elsewhere, and Democrats generally, they all go, they're so complacent, it seems to me, about the economic position of California. They keep saying we're the fifth biggest economy in the world, which is true on the kind of big metric of, GDP. But behind that headline, it's an economy that just isn't working for most people. What's your understanding of how we can have those two things at the same time? Very, big economy, fifth biggest in the world. Yes, absolutely. That is great, something to be proud of. But at the same time, the highest poverty rate. Right now, I believe we have the second highest unemployment rate in the country. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, California is blessed with a lot of wonderful things. A beautiful natural climate. We have an industrious people. We have institutions of higher learning that are some of the best in the country and the world. We have wonderful, innovative businesses that have started and grown in California. And we have just a lot of natural advantages. So, the question is, what do you do with all that natural advantage? I think about, my son plays both basketball and baseball. And I think sometimes, you got people out there who are incredibly tall, who would be natural assets to play basketball. And they're good, but could they be better? They could be, right? And it's training and it's work and it's the desire to get better. And I look at California and I think, look, a lot of these politicians rest on their laurels. They say, oh, yeah, California is doing great, fifth largest economy, by some measures, the fourth largest economy in the world. Our economy is great. And what they don't realize is we could be so much better if we weren't constrained by some of the crazy regulations we have, if we weren't constrained by a tax code that doesn't incentivize growth or saving or investment or the kinds of things we want. If we actually had a structure that allowed us to create jobs, that allowed job creators and small businesses to create jobs free from regulation. You look at some of the businesses that have left California, that have left San Francisco in recent years, that gives you a flavor for how we're not meeting our potential. And I just think that we really have been too complacent when it comes to our economic policy for too long in the state. And several years ago, there was a complete analysis done of the California economic system and our economic policies by a bipartisan group. And they came to the conclusion that there are so many things our state is not doing well, that if we got some of these things going, boy, our state, maybe we would be the third largest economy. Who knows, right? I mean, we could continue to grow. So too much complacency, too much, again, that one party governance, I think, has really interfered with our ability to think creatively. And then unfortunately, we haven't had the right kinds of changes in economic policy. It takes new leadership, in my view.
It does. I mean, you don't see any sign of it, honestly. What I've noticed is since the November election, November 2024, I've noticed that some Democrats in the state legislature are saying the right words, and saying things like, "We got to focus more on the cost of living and cost of housing." Okay, great. But there's no sign, it seems to me, of real reform. It's just this words. I mean, why don't they? Do you see any sign of a big change coming from the Democrats? I don't.
No, because they're beholden to the institutional interests, like,
That's it.
public
Exactly.
employee unions
Yes.
and trial lawyers and their political donors who, just want to see progressive social policies and don't care about anything else. They're too beholden to institutional interests. And that's why, frankly, Steve, I mean, you mentioned my campaign. One of the things that makes it hard for a non-Democrat to win in California is these institutional interests are aligned against change. They're aligned against the kinds of reforms that could make a difference. And to break through, what you need is people to realize, hey, California is not working as well as it should. And we saw that in the aftermath of the wildfires. Think about how many people who had voted Democrat their whole lives saying, you know what, maybe we need a change. You look at the corruption of Karen Bass, mayor of Los Angeles, who can't even figure out how to govern, runs off to a country that travels abroad while her city is burning, now has a $1 billion budget deficit and is blaming everyone else except for her own mismanagement. These are the kinds of things I look at and I think, gosh, people need to realize that the only way that we change things in California is with a new set of leaders. And I made this case recently. I'm a contributing writer now for the LA Times, and I wrote a piece recently where I diagnosed the basic challenge we have, which is that we do not have leaders who are willing to question the status quo and move forward with a new set of ideas, and that's a problem.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I saw that. By the way, congratulations on that. It's great to have your voice in the LA Times. They really mean it when the new owner says, I want to have
Yeah.
diverse voices there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's my friend Scott Jennings, who has a column he writes periodically there, and I've seen a few other really sensible, thoughtful people pop up on the opinion page. But more broadly, like this should tell us something, right? I mean, if you look at a newspaper like the Los Angeles Times, which has traditionally been very ideologically homogenous, now beginning to take a turn and say, look, we need to represent the real diversity of voices that is California. By the way, when we talk about diversity, there's really very few more important things than having viewpoint diversity in our discussions, in our debates, in our considerations of what the right public policy solutions are. So I'm encouraged that we're seeing more of that in California.
Yeah, exactly. I want to go back to what something you said about the trial law. Is very interesting because I go through that. I make the same argument, that you've got these structural factors in place that I mean, that you could call it corruption, you can call it whatever you want, but it's basically this institutional power structure that stops that stops them from doing the kind of changes, stops the Democrats from doing the kind of changes that we need. We talk about the unions a lot. The trial lawyers we don't talk about so often. Just unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, I mean, listen, you look at all of these laws. I mean, we've talked about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, as an example. I mean, of course, everyone wants to have California is known, and we've always been on the vanguard of ensuring that we do the right things to protect our environment and to advance the cause of clean air and clean water and to deal with all of these concerns. That's not what this law has become about, unfortunately, Steve. This law has become about litigation. It's become about tying up projects and efforts to consider how we can move our economy forward, create opportunities for those on the lower end of the income scale. CEQA has stood in the way of that, and it's less about protecting the environment, although the law is named that. It's really more about legal fees. It's about litigation. And you got all sorts of lawyers who are making a ton of money litigating off this thing, and they don't want to see any changes to it. So when a couple brave Democrats step forward and say, hey, maybe we need to change this, they get shouted down because guess what? All their colleagues are getting campaign contributions from trial lawyers. They are benefiting off of the trial lawyer lobby, and the trial lawyer lobby stands in the way of reform, not just of this law, but you look at others as well, whether it's the legal environment around businesses and why more and more small businesses are getting strangled in California. You've got great community, local businesses that want to grow and invest in their communities. They can't because of the litigation environment, right? We make it so easy in this state to sue over this and that and the other. And so there's all sorts of efforts underway to reform the legal environment in California. And that's another key thing we're going to have to do to really improve the state, in my mind. It's really hard to do, though. Don't get me wrong, because there's a lot of people who oppose it. Who have a lot of money.
So I mean, when I'm on the road and I talk to businesses, particularly, like real kind of complicated small businesses where like restaurants, where you got a lot of different factors. You got the labor aspect, environmental, local environmental thing. There's so much that makes it impossible to run a business like that. One of the big things we talked about it a while back. I don't actually know what happened to it. The PAGA reform,
Uh-huh.
Private Attorney General Act.
Yeah.
And there was a ballot initiative, then it was taken off the ballot. There was a deal done. Have you been following that? Where's that got to? Because that's
Yeah,
the source of a lot of these.
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's an example of one where we would be able to reform the legal system essentially by, in California, it's very easy for someone, if aided by one of these trial lawyers, to essentially be what's called a private attorney general, to basically be a super regulatory cop going out and suing small businesses, suing businesses who are just trying to grow and invest, and many of whom are trying to do the right thing. And the idea behind this reform you mentioned, Steve, was, look, let's reform the law to make it a little bit harder for folks to engage in this kind of really frivolous legal activity. And I don't know, unfortunately, what the pathway forward is for that. I hope there is a pathway forward, because I think what we need is some really robust effort in the state to balance. I mean, obviously, we want to see strong enforcement of the law. We don't want people and businesses and entities that are violating the law to be able to get away with it. But we also don't want the current environment where it's just very clear that there's so much frivolous suing going on that's nothing but what economists would call deadweight loss. It doesn't benefit the economy. It doesn't benefit job creation. It doesn't make California a better place to work and to raise a family. Why are we doing all this? So, yeah, we've got to do something about that. And I hope that maybe if the legislature is unwilling to do it, which I don't think they will be, the people should do it through the initiative
Yes.
process.
Yeah. I mean, it's just when you actually hear the stories, it's so heartbreaking. You got people just trying to do their best to run a business, create a service that, as you said, a local community wants, the lifeblood of a local community often. And they're just being blocked and harassed and poked at all the time by all this stuff. And it's really heartbreaking. Some states have done big reform on this. Am I right in thinking Texas did a big, is this, tort reform? Is that what that was that the years ago? I was hearing about that.
Yeah, many other states have done it. Actually, not just Texas. Some of the states in the Mountain West have done good tort reform laws. And actually, if you look at California, we have the example of a law on the medical malpractice side, a law called MICRA, that has been very, very useful in holding down medical malpractice premiums, allowing doctors to practice here in California. The trial lawyers have tried to erode that law. It was passed in the
Interesting.
1970s. The trial lawyers have tried to erode it, but California's standard around a lot of those issues is actually still one of the best in the country. So we have an example of things getting done. Unfortunately, Steve, they got done 50 years ago. They're not getting done now. They got done a long time ago. So, but yeah, look, tort reform is a critically important issue. But let's not lose sight of the bigger problem in my mind, which is that we don't have economic policies oriented in the state toward growing our economy, creating more opportunity for people up and down the income spectrum. And we have an attitude sometimes in this state, well, we got to have a safety net. A safety net is not a forever net. But in this state, a lot of times there's a notion that, hey, if there's a government program, let's just keep it going, because to try and change it or to reform it is not compassionate. It's not a good idea. Well, the reality is sometimes you're going to have to. You're going to have to look at how we make these programs work better so people can transition from being in the safety net to having a job that pays well and one that can support their family. And we have to figure out how to make that transition.
Well, that's it's a big theme of one of the chapters of my book, Califailure, is compassion. I go through the different ideologies that have contributed to all of this. And one of them, I call it compassionism, which is, it's sort of superficially compassionate. Oh, yes, we want to look after people, but it's not truly compassionate, because you're not helping people to achieve the independence that actually is what we would all want to see.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. And it's a very clever way of talking about it, Steve, because I think, look, who doesn't want to be compassionate? Who doesn't want to help their fellow man or fellow woman with the challenges they have? But we've created a structure now where we're not helping people anymore. We are creating a permanent group of people that is entirely dependent on government, as opposed to figuring out, and look, they don't necessarily want to be, but the incentives are there. The structure is there. It's much easier. You think about the pandemic era unemployment insurance fiasco. One of the issues we had during that era was that we created a set of policies that made it easier and better to be on government assistance than to work. People are naturally going to respond to incentives. I don't blame people when they look at the incentives and they say, well, I can make, $50,000 a year by staying on this unemployment insurance program, or I can make 40,000 or 30,000 a year working a job that I can get. Well, I'm going to stay on the program. It is a perfectly natural thing when you design these programs, and the supporters of them say, well, we got to be compassionate. And it's like, no one's saying we aren't going to be compassionate, but is it compassionate to lock people into a life of dependence on government? That's the question.
It's exactly, but it just feels to be completely going right back to where you started. This kind of approach is unchallenged in California. I was just watching the other week when she announced her campaign for governor, Katie Porter, and it was hilarious. She put out this video about how, as I was saying earlier, she was saying, oh, it's difficult to live, and middle class people, and costs, and housing, and whatever. We need new ideas. She kept saying new ideas, but there was not a sign of anything new in what she's saying. And then because she's a progressive, she's self-described, and that's what we've had for years now in California. No, there's nothing new about what she or any other Democrat is saying.
No, there's certainly no new ideas. I mean, if anything, they're rooted in, good old fashioned 1900s Marxist thought, right? I mean, you think about, not to make an extreme point out of this, but I presume, I'm almost certain she's in favor of socialized medicine, Medicare for all. This concept of taking people's health care that they like and turning it over to the government. That's not a new idea. Bernie Sanders might present it as a new idea.
Yes.
She might present that comes straight out of the playbook from this sort of socialist Marxist line that we've seen for well over a century. That's not a new concept. That's an old concept. And it's an old concept that's been disproven and failed. So many of her ideas, this notion that Katie Porter will be an innovative governor is a joke. If you look at all of the things she has stood for and all of the ways in which she has talked about more regulation, more policies to strangle the economy, more ways to interfere with the private sector, more ways to get in the way of the creation of good quality, high-paying jobs. The notion that she's going to bring new ideas or fresh ideas to the discussion is a joke. Absolute joke.
A joke. Exactly. Can we talk about healthcare for a bit? I know you've done some work on that. Did you were at Hoover, right? You were doing some work on healthcare.
Yeah.
Tell us where you got to with that, and what your thoughts are. We don't talk about that often on this show.
We have a project, a working group that's focused on how we make the healthcare system better. How do we make it more affordable? How do we improve quality? How do we give people more choices? And it's very encouraging. We actually just had a gathering of about 30 of the top healthcare thinkers in America on campus at Stanford about 3 weeks ago, and had a really great exchange of ideas across a whole set of different issues. And really what it boils down to, Steve, there's so many challenges with our healthcare system. Obviously, we know it's not as affordable as it should be. We know, particularly in rural parts of California and elsewhere, people don't have easy access to healthcare. These are all big challenges. But in my mind, what it comes down to is we don't have a healthcare system that's oriented toward the people that actually consume healthcare. We have a system that's oriented toward middlemen. We have a system that's oriented toward big corporate concerns. We have a system that's oriented toward the various lobbies, the various institutional interests. Who doesn't get represented in this system? It's patients, it's people who consume healthcare. So we're trying to figure out how to create a more patient-centered healthcare system where people actually have some choices and at lower cost, and lots of great ideas. I'd actually recommend people go to the Hoover Institution website, hoover.org, and look up the Healthcare Policy Working Group for some great ideas. And you can read all sorts of papers we've written about this. And it's just a topic that gets me really excited because I think there's a lot of things that we can do to make the healthcare system in California and America better.
Well, it's such a big part. It's so important for when you need it. It's like the only thing you think about, and the insurance is such a big part of everybody's costs. Who has to pay it? Are you looking at it just from a California reform perspective or federal as well?
No, we're looking at it through the federal lens, but also a big part of that is what's happening at the state level as well, because so much of our healthcare is state and local, and if we don't get that piece right, we're not going to get healthcare right for the American people, for the people of California. So it's a little bit of both, but predominantly federal.
So what do you think about the? Let's just quickly talk about the federal of the new administration in Washington. How do you see that affecting what happens in California, both from a policy perspective, but also politically?
Well, I think there's a lot of things the new administration is doing that frankly, I think Californians would like if they were able to maybe look past some of the political elements. I mean, traditionally, I think people in the state, have very strong views about the president. Some really like him, some don't like him. I just think it's important for people to look at the substance of what's being done. And so when you look, for example, at efforts to jumpstart economic growth, this idea that we need to cut federal regulations, they want to get rid of 10 regulations for every new one. They have a 10-for-1 policy. You look at the ways in which this administration is trying to move the ball forward on the kinds of tax changes and economic changes we need to create jobs. These are all things that I think ultimately will benefit Californians. But there's going to be a lot of back and forth between California and the federal government. I think one of the concerns I have, Steve, is this visceral kind of, we have to be against everything that the federal government's against coming out of the Newsom administration and out of the mouths of California Democrats. It's like, stop and think for a second. If there's things you want to oppose because, on matters of principle, you want to oppose them, that's one thing. But if you're opposing them just because they came from Trump, that to me is not a productive way to proceed. It's not a productive way to run the biggest economy in the country or to oversee the biggest political system or electorate in the country. And we have to be fair-minded, I think, about the things the administration is doing.
So one of the most high-profile things is obviously what Elon Musk is doing with Doge. Now, there are a lot of people who are saying, I'm one of them, we need Doge in California or some version.
We do need Doge in California, no question.
Yeah. So how do you see that? That obviously relates very much to the race you previously ran in terms of control. That was all about that kind of work.
I mean, we need Doge just to figure out where the money is all going, first of all. I mean, before we even get to cuts, let's just figure out where all the spending is. I mean, one of the things I raised when I ran for controller is California's the only state in the country where we don't have a requirement around line-by-line spending disclosure as a state government, which is ridiculous. I mean, even in states like Illinois, where they've got like 2 former governors in prison, although one just got pardoned from what I understand, former governors in prison, they've got more accountability than we do in California. So we need Doge, first of all, to come in and bring some accountability and transparency. And then secondly, let's figure out where we need to make changes. And there surely are places that where we need to make changes. And that's one of the things that made me most excited about being controller, is the ability to get in there and really see where the money was being spent, so we could tell people and then begin to move the ball forward on hopefully some cuts that would be additive at the end of the day. I think you could invest that money in schools. You could invest that money in growing the economy instead of the whatever random things these people are spending money on. You could actually solve the homelessness crisis, believe it or not. So
it is. I know it's amazing. I mean, all the time. One point I make is that if you listen to, NPR and so on, and read, consume media on the left, and particularly in relation to California, it's amazing how many stories end up with some kind of the place they always end up pointing to is, we need more money, right? More money for this, housing, more money for the teachers, schools, whatever. But we already have the highest taxes, right? I mean, I looked at it for the book. The budget of the state of California has nearly doubled in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And so you think, where's all the money going? We've got a lot of money in
well, that's exactly right. I mean, the issue isn't spending. In California, the issue isn't we need to spend more. We need to spend smarter. And we have to figure out where that money is going and how it's being used and whether it's being spent efficiently or not. And it makes a big difference, because you're already spending a ton of money. And when people say, oh, you can't cut, you're going to hurt people, it's like, listen for a second. If we could spend the same amount of money or less but achieve better results, why wouldn't we? And no one ever questions. The answer is always, well, I'm doing well because I'm spending more money. And it's just such a backwards mindset, so frustrating to me that we just haven't been able to make more progress on that.
But I guess it's also ties back to the institutional factors in the government unions that benefit from this public spending.
Yeah, well, I mean, all the entrenched interests, right? Whether it's public employee unions or trial lawyers, I mean, they benefit from the status quo. And so I can't support the status quo. I mean, I really think it's important for us to call that into question. But the only people who can do it are the elected leaders of the state. And that's why elected leadership matters.
And we need new elected leaders.
No question.
For sure. Well, that is a conversation for another day. But I'm really happy that we could make this work, Lahnee.
Absolutely.
I said to you, it's a special day for me. I got this book coming out. I wanted to elevate the show with some special guests.
Well, congratulations. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Well, there's nothing you don't know because you've studied this more than most. So, but I hope I've sort of brought a bit of a new kind of way of looking at some of the issues. But we all completely agree. We can't go on like this. It's completely
No.
outrageous.
It is. It's outrageous, and someone needs to fix it.
There you go. All right, Lahnee, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
So there you are. Hope you enjoyed our special episode to mark the publication of Califailure, Reversing the Ruin of America's Worst Run State. Get your copy if you haven't already. Make sure, of course, you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back here soon for the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show.